Live and yeah, man, we're still here. We're still talking to people. I mean, the way we're set up, we can keep rolling. We got good guests all week. In fact, some really, really good guests. So, invite you guys to jump on in here. The chat is open, and this will be an interesting, very interesting one. We're gonna take a little break from the whole coronavirus thing, if we could, just for a minute. I mean, if, you can go back to the news and they're talking about 24/7, but we're going to take a little break and talk about another problem in the world. We're going to deal with sex trafficking, and some things that are going on to fight that horrible thing. I mean, we got this virus and it's bad and we're doing everything we can to fight it, but there's some other things in the world that are ongoing that we can fight as well. So again, jump on in there. Invite you to go ahead and hit share wherever you're at. If you haven't subscribed or followed, do that. You'll see the notification when these interviews go live. So you definitely want to do that. Right now, on the line, I have live with us Nate Knapper. He is the founder and CEO of the Joseph Project. What is that? Well, hang on. This is going to get fun. How you doing, Nate?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Randy.
And where exactly are you at? I didn't check on my sheet to see where you're at. Are you in the DC area?
No, so I'm coming to you today from my home outside Detroit, Michigan, in the suburb of Clarkston. So we
Okay.
have a stay-at-home order right now, as I'm sure so many others do across the country. So we're trying to stay home, stay healthy, do our best to flatten the curve and slow the spread of the virus here from home.
Sure. Now, I know not all, you're in law enforcement. Not everybody in law enforcement is having to stay at home. So, but you guys are not in the field right now, I guess.
That's right. So, it's important for the American people to understand that the law enforcement mission at the federal, state, and local level does continue despite what's going on with the virus. We are on a reduced schedule right now where certain squad members will come in, others will work from home, and we'll have that flexible telework schedule. But of course, we're tied to our cell phones 24/7, and in emergency situations, we'll be available on. So law enforcement mission continues despite what's happening with this national emergency.
All right. Well, let's talk about your other passion, which is the Joseph Project, and here it is online at josephproject.com. People can check that out. But go ahead and jump into this. Tell us exactly what it is and why you started it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the Joseph Project at its core is a nonprofit organization, and the mission is to provide pro bono legal services to survivors of human trafficking. And the reason that that is important is because very oftentimes, when survivors of trafficking are brought out of the circumstances of their exploitation, very often through law enforcement operations and undercover activities and things like that, they may be removed from the immediate circumstances of that danger. But the reality is that they are still not free. And the reason why that's the case is because, in my experience, almost every time survivors of trafficking have substantial legal needs when they come out of an exploitation scenario that keep them encumbered from living the future that they would otherwise dream for themselves to live. And so the Joseph Project was a nonprofit that was incorporated to address the legal collateral damage that results from trafficking situations so that people can overcome their legal obstacles and live the dreams that they have for themselves.
Okay, put that into ordinary language for the rest of us. Someone is trafficked and they get out, however they get out. What exactly does that mean for you guys?
Yep. Well, so what it means for us is that somebody is no longer in an exploitative situation. So that is, they are away from a controller, or oftentimes referred to as a pimp, that is profiting from their sexual or their labor exploitation. So they are removed from that circumstance. But what they need now, among many other things, is the rendering of legal assistance because they have very oftentimes needs related to their criminal records. They have various family law obstacles that they have to overcome. If there's a foreign national involved in the trafficking situation, they have immigration related challenges that they have to meet.
Mm.
And so the goal is to match these survivors with pro bono legal first responders,
Right.
attorneys who are prepared and willing to step up and meet those very urgent legal needs free of charge.
So someone is trafficked and they get charged with what, prostitution or something like that, and that means they can't get a job. Is that what we're talking about?
It is what we're talking about. It could be a variety of different charges. Certainly, we have seen our share of survivors who have wrongfully been charged with prostitution related activities when they were, in fact, being forced, defrauded,
Yeah.
or coerced
Gotcha.
into this behavior. But there are other criminal record elements as well. You could have drug possession
Hmm.
that needs to be addressed. Oftentimes, coercion by means of drug use is a frequent means of trafficking today. And so that's another very frequent problem that we see and try to address.
So why is it important to expunge a record or work through the process, as opposed to just throwing the book at them?
Yeah, well, I think anybody who's ever had a legal challenge understands that it's very difficult to move forward from that in any meaningful way until it's addressed. So, for example, with respect to a prostitution charge, you have that label that sort of attaches to you, and it follows you into your future. Unless you do something to address it. And so we have seen circumstances where expungements have been granted by courts here locally to the Detroit area. And the survivors who are granted those expungements will say things like, I can't believe that this label is no longer following me. It's
Mm.
no longer how I'm legally defined. So they are now unchained, unshackled, and have the ability to move forward unencumbered by that label that would prevent them from, for example, getting the job of their choice or attending the educational institution of their choice, things like that.
Yeah, that's great. You're a Christian, yes?
I am a believer,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Do you see any spiritual parallels to that, to getting rid of the old labels?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's replete throughout Scripture, right? I mean, you could talk about if you're in Christ, you're a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. Very oftentimes, as I'm sure will come out in the course of the conversation, I tend to understand things through the lens of the Joseph story, very unsurprisingly. And, to us, Joseph represents this individual who transitioned, right, from exploitation. He was sold into Egyptian slavery by his own brothers. You might say today, legally speaking, that he was commercially exploited for labor services through force. So he was one of history's very earliest recorded examples of human trafficking. But the beautiful thing about that story is that because he was able to maintain his faith in God, he was able to persevere through the very difficult, very unfair things that happened in his life. He eventually found himself in a moment where the Egyptian Pharaoh pulls him out of prison and he is able to live the dream of leadership that he had originally. So when we think of Joseph and we think of the scriptures, we think of somebody who transitioned from exploitation to empowerment. And that's really the transition that we try to facilitate for every survivor that we come into contact with.
Ah, that is awesome. We're talking to Nate Knapper, the founder and CEO of the Joseph Project, online at josephproject.com. Also, law enforcement officer, and I'm wondering, how did you get into this? I mean, how do you go from, I guess, I don't know, were you in law school, or were you in police academy kind of thing, and then you got into founding a nonprofit to help people that have been exploited? Tell me a little bit of your history.
Yeah, just a bit about the journey. I mean, not unlike Joseph, my dreams began very early. So I will always remember that 9/11 happened right around the time that I was in high school. I was about a sophomore, and as we were watching that current event unfold, I thought to myself, well, that somebody has to do something to make sure that that doesn't happen to our country again. And at that time, I was thinking that somebody was going to be me, and so I decided that my professional track would be to join the intelligence community. And so what I tried to do was tailor some of my educational coursework to make sure that I could make it into one of those agencies that would combat the terrorist threat that we face. And so eventually, I found that the best and surest route for me to be able to achieve that goal was to attend law school. And so after undergraduate school at Calvin College, I attended law school at Pepperdine, which is out in Southern California on the Malibu coastline.
Yeah, beautiful.
Very beautiful campus. And spent 3 years there studying. And I became an assistant attorney general shortly after passing the bar exam. So I began my career, as you mentioned, as an attorney here in the state of Michigan at the Department of Attorney General. And shortly after I was given that opportunity, I joined the state of Michigan's first ever Human Trafficking Commission, which was organized in 2013. And in that capacity, I was able to learn about the issue from a legislative perspective, a policy perspective, and I ended up serving as one of the principal authors of a report that would ultimately find its way to the governor's office, and it would transform the statutory framework that we have for human trafficking here in Michigan. So after that happened, I still, sort of hung on to that dream of joining the intelligence community, and I put my name in for the FBI and was accepted to the academy at Quantico. And I think somebody was probably paying attention to our backgrounds when we got there, because when I arrived and they sort of decide what squad they want to place you on, they said, well, he's got this trafficking background, so why don't we put him on the trafficking and exploitation squad in Detroit? So when I graduated from Quantico, my first assignment out was with the human trafficking squad here in Detroit.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, now how does that sounds like a great career. How does that lead to the nonprofit, the Joseph Project?
Yeah, so in that capacity, that very frontline enforcement role that I had there, one of the things that I was seeing, and we interacted with many survivors of trafficking, and you conduct operations in hotels, you do them in vehicles, you do them in private residence, and you pull these people out of these circumstances. And again, while they are removed from the immediate danger, one of the things that you find is that law enforcement, because we have additional cases and circumstances that we have to address, we often have to move quickly along. But meanwhile, you have this individual back here that you have just pulled out of a situation, and they have these very difficult legal hurdles. And as an attorney, I said, somebody's got to do something about those. And so you sort of take that measure of initiative upon yourself to devise a way to address the legal needs that are very significant, and that's where the Joseph Project was incorporated.
How do you balance, I guess, your faith with the legal work? I mean, since it's a separate nonprofit, I guess you can talk all you want about your faith, but is there an effort to sort of proselytize through this, or do you keep it fairly? How do you balance all that? You get what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. I mean, the Joseph Project is unashamedly a faith-based organization, and so our inspiration comes from that biblical story from the book of Genesis. And so for us, it makes no sense, and frankly, we don't even try to divorce
Okay.
the work that we do from the biblical narrative. So it's a faith-based organization, and the primary message that we try to communicate through the nonprofit, it's just a vehicle for a message, and that message is Genesis 50:20, which is Joseph speaking to his brothers who trafficked him. He says, "You meant evil, God meant good." So whatever was meant for your harm, God knows how to turn it all around and use it for your advantage, and that's the entire message of the nonprofit.
No, I am thrilled that you have the freedom to be that open. I know how sometimes it can be when you're working government and faith. Sometimes it can be a little tricky. So I'm glad that you found a way that you can be open about it. And this is a huge issue. It's always been significant to me. Of course, here at Life Outreach International, we do a lot overseas. We don't talk as much about what we do here in the United States, but we do help through some partner organizations, people getting out of sex trafficking here. But when I was not working here, back around 2000-ish, I was working for an internet filtering company, one of the first ones, and we actually worked with a congressman. We were meeting with NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, working on COPPA, the Children's Online Protection Act, and I actually trained a police department on how to reverse IP lookup and things like that to track these people down, and reported people to the FBI, reported people up in Canada. By the way, the FBI, when you report something to the FBI, they never get back with you. I'm guessing that's a common thing.
Well, I hope that's not a common thing because, we pride ourselves on being responsive. We hope that when tips come in from the public, that somebody would engage in a measure of follow-up to try to drill down on exactly what information is being provided, try to vet out the validity of the information, and determine whether a case opening is warranted. Now, I should say that Joseph Project and my FBI responsibilities are things that I keep separate.
Sure.
So,
Sorry.
the FBI's processes are distinctly separate from what goes on at Joseph. But I hope that with respect to the Bureau, if somebody attempted to contact us or any other law enforcement outfit, that they would find that entity to be responsive.
Yeah, I probably was not clear in that. They were on that front. It's just that I think because of privacy and because of ongoing cases, I always wanted to know the outcome, and it's not that simple in the real world.
Yeah.
But I knew we were doing good. I guess my point before I got sidetracked was that this has always been a very important issue personally, and in here or at Life Action International, and so what you're doing really means a lot. Get into some of the cases on the Joseph Project side that you've dealt with. Do you have any good stories that sort of make you smile, that make you feel like, hey, this is exactly why we're doing what we're doing?
Oh, absolutely. And, one of our very favorite things is to share the stories of some of the wins that we are able to work with survivors to achieve. One that's very special to me and that stands out right away. Again, in the course of your work, you get to encounter several survivors of trafficking, but one that stands out to me was actually one that I did not meet during my time in the field. I actually met her at a church service of all places, and this was shortly after my graduation from my law enforcement academy, and I was placed back in Detroit, and I went to church one week at Woodside Bible Church in Troy, Michigan, and in the course of the service, and there are thousands of people that attend, and I'm sitting there, somewhere toward the back, and they bring up this young woman. Her name's Delynn, and she shares a story that would shock most people based on the brutality of what she experienced. This was an individual who was assaulted more viciously than anybody that I've personally ever heard of. And so I went up to her after the conclusion of the service, and I introduced myself, and I felt like at that moment I was uniquely positioned to do something for her given the trafficking that she had encountered. And so I introduced myself, and it became a friendship, and it's a friendship that extended for several years. And in the course of that friendship, one of the things that I learned, again relating back to her assault, is that she was at one point brutalized to the point that she almost passed away. And there was a controller in her life here local to Detroit that had stabbed her multiple times, had broken her jaw, fractured her clavicle, spoke about burning her alive and drowning her in the bathtub, and then left her to die in one of his bedrooms there for a couple of days. And eventually, this individual concludes that she's going to die right here in my house if I don't take her to get medical attention. So he decides that what he's going to do is take her to a local hospital, leave her on the doorstep, and drive away. Now, he does that, and thankfully, Delynn is able to receive medical treatment there at the hospital and recover from her injuries. Now, the problem is that she is charged for the services that the hospital rendered, and she knows nothing about these medical expenses. So eventually circumstances progress, and the hospital starts coordinating with a law firm to sue Delynn for the expenses. And so imagine being trafficked and then physically assaulted and then taken to the hospital and charged for the expenses related to your own assault. So, so this is the circumstance that Delynn finds herself in, and she comes to us, and she shrugs, and she's like, what am I going to do about this?" And I told her, "Delynn, you really need legal counsel." And so what we did is we connected her with pro bono attorneys, one of whom was highly skilled in the area of medical debt collection. And working with that attorney pro bono, she was able to repair her credit history, be compensated for the payments that she was making to the hospital,
Hmm.
and the hospital was fully reimbursed for services rendered. So that was the initial story that began the incorporation of the Joseph Project. And it's very special to me because of how I met Delynn and the woman that I know that she is today.
Did they ever catch the guy? I guess everybody out here is going, "That's great, by the way. That's wonderful. That's amazing." Did they ever catch the guy?
Yes, they did. Thankfully, after I heard that story from Delynn, we kind of took it back and we mulled it over and brainstormed what could be done. And without going into too many of the details, that individual was arrested ultimately on drug charges. He was a bad actor. He was lacing his drugs with fentanyl, which is a killer,
Mm.
and just not good stuff at all. So
Yeah.
he's where he belongs right now.
Now this is one of those stories that you just go, "Wow, I can't believe that happened."
Hmm.
How common is sex trafficking, human trafficking in the United States and Canada?
It's common. I think it's very prevalent and probably more prevalent than people recognize. A lot of times you still encounter people who will say things like, well, this sounds really bad, but it doesn't happen where I live.
Right.
And the reality is that's not the case. It happens in cities and towns all around the United States. And, we just had a survivor that we were working with who came originally from one of Michigan's very wealthiest cities. And so it happens in the upscale areas, it happens in the urban centers, it happens among Caucasians, African Americans, Latinos. It doesn't discriminate based on demographic or ethnicity or socioeconomic status. It happens all over the place. And so it is a very real problem that exists all across the country.
Yeah, they busted a house in the suburb of Dallas Fort Worth that I live in, and it's a nice suburb. I mean, it's a church on every corner, um, great people. My kids went to public schools, and then there was a house where they were trafficking people in our community. And I know up in Oklahoma, where I lived for several years, they've got an issue with the truck stops and things like that, where it's surprising how prevalent that it is. It's shocking, actually, in our country. What can the average person do? Obviously, they can support organizations like yours.
Yeah.
I'll show you people the website again. That's josephproject.com, and there's plenty of things you can do if you want to help out in that area. You're, you're going to do nothing but help people that have been abused when you support the Joseph Project. But what are some of the other things people can do to kind of help fight this? It seems like something that, yeah, it's great if you're law enforcement or a lawyer, but what can I do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a very common phrase that we use in law enforcement, and that phrase is if you see something, say something.
Mm.
It is very difficult to have law enforcement do something about a problem if we don't know that it exists. And so, one of the things that we do is we rely on our community to be our eyes and ears and to
Mm.
let us know about illegalities that are going on in our communities. And so, if that's something that you see, then you should feel very free to report that information to your federal, state, or local law enforcement outfits. And again, we hope that it will be the case that somebody reaches out to you to vet that information. So I think victim identification is key, and part of that involves communicating with law enforcement or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, as you mentioned, or the National Human Trafficking Hotline to report this information when you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our viewers is asking if the Joseph Project ever does any work in Canada. Are you exclusive to the U.S.? I mean, I would think being right there near Windsor, you would have opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. So of course, Detroit and sort of Michigan more broadly, we're uniquely positioned to serve along and maybe even inside Canada. Right now, we're based primarily in Detroit, but that doesn't prevent us from, for example, making a phone call across the border
Mm.
or to a law firm that would have Canadian-based operations
Yeah.
to see if there's a survivor in need and they're based in Canada, can we arrange to have legal counsel help them through the Canadian legal
Good.
system? I don't see why that couldn't happen.
Yeah, yeah, okay. One other question. Do you, how many, obviously it's women, I think, that are on the receiving end of this sort of abuse more often than men, although it's not exclusive. Do you run into a lot of situations where there are children involved?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think the short answer is yes. There are children who are trafficked, and just to give you some perspective on that, I can remember that I think this was a couple of years ago now. There was a press release that went around based on an FBI operation nationwide. At that time, it was called Operation Cross Country, and the headline that stuck with everybody because of how shocking it was actually a case that was based out of Denver, and there was a child who was being exploited by a family member, and that child was just 3 months old.
Hmm.
And so obviously, it happens among very young children. But I will say that the majority of cases that exist out there do relate to adult victimization.
What about the women who are in legal trouble, or being abused, victimized, trafficked, who have children?
Yeah, well, so I mean, just to give you another story, I mean, you asked about certain examples of people that we've helped. So that is very common for survivors to have children. And I'm thinking of one who was engaged in coercion by means of drug use. So she was being trafficked based on people who were keeping her addicted to controlled substances, primarily, the harder stuff like crack cocaine and heroin. And what ended up happening is that she lost custody of a daughter that
Yeah,
she had. And so, when you go through the legal system and they see that kind of activity going on, the reaction is, and probably rightly so, to remove a child from a circumstance
sure.
where there's potential danger. Now, here's the beautiful thing. This woman turns her life around, right? She gets into a local care facility. She goes through their program, very wonderful place in Pontiac, Michigan called Grace Centers of Hope, and she finishes the program, turns her life completely around, believer in Jesus, and now she wants custody of her daughter back. And so to do that, you need legal counsel to go through proper legal channels to make that happen. And so we matched her with a family law attorney. She made contact with us, and through a sequence of hearings, she was able to be reunited with her daughter. And I'll never forget when she achieved that ruling through the court. She called me and she was in tears to thank us for the work that the attorney had done, and just so grateful for our legal first responder network and the good work that they did on that case.
Hmm. That's amazing. Again, this is Nate Knapper. He's the founder and CEO of the Joseph Project. Lawyer, law enforcement agent, Christian. And last question for you, Nate.
Yeah,
As you face these things, as you work with these people that have gone through hell, um,
yeah.
when you go home and you start praying, what is your prayer?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. My prayer is that, for the survivors, first of all, that they would not feel like they have to be defined by the circumstances of their past. So, again, you can make that transition from exploited to empowered, and God can take the very broken pieces of your life and your story, just like He did for Joseph, and He can reassemble them into something that is beautiful and that is meaningful and that has social impact and social consequence. And that, then I think for my team, I pray for protection. I pray for vision and motivation. I'm so grateful for the board that we have. I'm grateful for Katie Carroll, our administrative coordinator, Christy Kirschman, our chief operations officer, and so many others from our legal first responder network. And I just pray that they would continue to feel the impact of what they're doing and understand that they really are changing lives of people who are truly vulnerable and
Mm,
who need assistance that they could not get in any other way.
no, no, no doubt about it. Man, this is so cool what you're doing, and I'm sorry you have to do it, but I'm grateful that you are doing it, and even more grateful that you're doing it in the name of Jesus. That means That is such a badge of honor to call you a brother in Christ. So man, I appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, we appreciate you having us on. Thanks so much.
You guys share this, man. I mean, this is tough stuff, but man, what an encouragement to see what the church. Aren't you proud to be a part of the church when you see guys like Nate? I mean, that is too cool. So thanks again, Nate, and check out the Joseph Project, you guys out there. Be sure you share this, and again, subscribe, follow, so you can see more interviews like this. But get the word out. I mean, raising awareness is a big part of it. There's some practical information in here where you can do something. And thanks for hanging out today. And I will see you again. We got more fabulous interviews this week, so I will see you again every day right here on Life Today Live.
Where are you going to spend eternity? Where are you going to spend eternity? Jesus Christ says there's only one way to heaven, I'm the way. One way to heaven. He's a born-again person. Born-again person. And if you miss Christ, you're going to miss the best of life.